Hello and welcome to another Wardlaw Workshop. Every week the museums of the University of St Andrews and the Wardlaw Museum bring you a project that you can do at home with a little bit of advice from experts at the University of St Andrews. Last week we found out about quipus, which were used by the Inca in South America for recording information. And 6-year-old Benjamin has sent this photograph of his quipu, which has a secret message wishing a happy birthday to Tom. Well done, Benjamin. Thanks for sending that, and happy birthday, Tom. So, what are we going to be finding out about this week? Let's see. Happy Easter! This week we're going to find out what your chocolate eggs have to do with space. But first we're going to have a go at making statues of someone that's really important to us. Why? Because in some parts of the world that is an Easter tradition. In some parts of Spain during Holy Week, which was last week, they carry statues of Mary and Jesus through the streets. Why? Because Easter is the Christian celebration of the death and resurrection, that's coming back to life, of Jesus, roughly 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem. And for Christians, that is the central, most important part of history. Christians believe that Jesus was God and at the same time that he was man. It's quite complicated, but who said life was simple? And that's why there are so many statues of him, both on the cross and after his resurrection. And we have one in the museum. This is on the mace of the College of St Salvator from about 1450, and it shows Jesus after his resurrection. How do we know? Well, look really closely and you can see tiny, tiny holes in his hands. Those are where the nails were hammered in that put him on the cross. And it shows us that this is Jesus after he has come back to life. In the museum, we also have other statues that some people believe to be really important or even believe to be gods. So here we have a statue of Shiva and Parvati, who are worshipped by Hindus as gods. And here we have Buddha, who is the leader or the founder of Buddhism. And here we have another statue of Buddha. Now, there's an artist called David Mack from right here in Fife who makes statues using everyday objects. So he's made a statue of Jesus on the cross made of coat hangers. You can look that up on the internet. And in the museum, you'll be able to see this statue of his. This, again, is Buddha. And what's this one made of? It's made of matchsticks. Now, there's another tradition in Brazil that during Easter they burn a statue of Judas. He was the man that the Bible says betrayed Jesus and ended up getting him killed. And David Mack does something similar. He often sets on fire some of these heads made of matches. This is one that he set on fire at the Stanza Poetry Festival in St Andrews a few years ago. So your challenge for this week is to make your own statue of someone that's really important to you out of things you can find in your home. However, probably not a good idea to set it on fire. Leave that to the professionals. When you're making your statue, try and give us some clues about why the person is important, a bit like the nail marks in the hands of our Jesus statue. If you want more ideas about how you can give clues about people, take a look back at last week's video on drama, when we had a look at some artworks and how we can tell things about the people in them. Those ideas work as well for statues. So have a great week making your statues, and don't forget to send pictures of them to us. We really enjoy receiving them. You can pop them in the comments or you can email them to us on museumlearning@st-andrews.ac.uk. Now, I also said that today we were going to find out what your chocolate eggs have to do with space. And to tell us, here's Dr. Katie Eagleton. She's the Director of Museums at the University of St Andrews, and that means that she's my boss. So be nice to her.
Hi, I'm Katie Eagleton. I'm the Director of Museums at the University of St Andrews. I also research the history of astronomy and timekeeping and the instruments and objects that people use to look up at the heavens all over the world and throughout history. So if you look up at a clear night sky and set a camera to a really long exposure, you might see something that looks a bit like this picture on the cover of this book. It appears almost as if the Earth is at the middle, staying still, and everything else is moving around. And it's not everywhere and always, but often that in the past is how people thought about astronomy. They thought the sun and the moon moved around the Earth, and they thought the stars moved around, all of that. The earlier instruments that I've been studying, that's the way they work, is about understanding the position of the sun or the moon relative to Earth, but often assuming that the Earth is what's staying in the middle. So one of the instruments that was used to look at the movement of the sun and the moon and the stars in the medieval period, so a few hundred years ago in Europe, and before that in the Middle East, and before that in the ancient world, was a thing called the astrolabe. It was one of a number of instruments that helped us see things like the movement of time and the movement of the heavenly bodies. It's a really interesting and complicated instrument that you can think of as like a map of the whole of the night sky that you can use to calculate and to do observations. So if you know how one of these works, how you can make it and how you can use it, you have a really good understanding of what the basics were of astronomy 500 years ago. So for any of you who live in Scotland, you can't help but notice that in the last few weeks we've really started to see spring arrive. The days are getting longer, the sun's coming back, and it feels like after some short days in winter, since we got past the middle of March, it's starting to get longer and sunnier again. And that's astronomical as well, because if you look at the Earth, and here's my sort of jigsaw puzzle globe here, Scotland is right up here, quite a long way north of the equator, which is down here. So that means because the Earth is tilted, it's further away from the sun and there's shorter days and less warmth in the winter. But then in the summer, it's tilted towards the sun, so we get longer days. And the point at which that changeover happens is called the equinox. And that's around about the 21st of March in the spring, and it's around about the 20th, 21st, 22nd of October in the autumn. And so every year there's that point where in the northern hemisphere, so north of the equator on my globe, the top half of the Earth, the day is about 12 hours and the night is about 12 hours. That's a really important astronomical moment in the year, and it's something that became really important for the calculation of Easter. So we just had Easter this weekend, and if I asked you, how did we know it was Easter? You might say, it was in the calendar. And then the question is, how did it get into the calendar? How did it get fixed on that date? Because you might know that Easter moves around, and each year it's on a different Sunday for Easter Sunday, and so Good Friday is on a different Friday. And that also is astronomical, because Easter is the Sunday after the full moon that's on or after the equinox. So you've got the equinox when it's 12 hours day and 12 hours night. Then you look for the full moon after that, and you look for the Sunday after that. So you're hopefully seeing a little bit now that actually Easter is a really complicated astronomical calculation. You have to understand the movement of the moon so that you know when there's a full moon. You have to understand the movement of the sun because you have to know when the different days and months are, and you have to understand the days of the week so you know when the Sunday is. And starting 2,000 years ago, from the very beginning of the Christian church, there were constant debates about how to fix the date of Easter. So lots of different people tried to find ways of fixing Easter, and other people tried to find kind of quick and easy methods to pick the date, to settle on the date. But what you get in medieval Europe is a lot of texts that have huge tables in that give the dates. One of those is a monk from Northumbria called Bede, and in about 700 he published a book called The Reckoning of Time. But actually what this book really talks about is how you pick the date of Easter. It's other things as well, but it's primarily that. And it looks at the motion of the moon and how you pick the date of Easter. And in it there's tables that give the date of Easter for more than 500 years, which for people at that time must have felt like it was unimaginably far into the future. But it's the same motion of the sun, the same motion of the moon, and so Easter today is still a complicated date to fix. So as you're tucking into your chocolate eggs, just think a little bit about the fact you're actually doing some astronomy very indirectly, although I'm not sure your science teachers would have much truck with that argument.
If space and science is your thing, pop over to see our friends on the Public Engagement Facebook page. We'll put the link in the comments because you'll be able to ask a question from a real scientist. Have a go and see what you can find out. So, that's all for next week. We'll see you next week. That's all for next week. We'll see you next week. What does that mean? That's all for this week. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.